I am Jarvis, your storyteller. Welcome to the Science Fiction Exploration. If you like the story, please subscribe to our channel. The emergency alert pierced through Dr. Nova Kingston's quarters aboard the medical transport vessel Nightingale, jolting her from a deep sleep. The message was brief but urgent. Critical xenofauna casualty. Helios 7 research station. No local expertise. Immediate assistance required. Nova had treated everything from wounded Martian sandstalkers to injured gas giant leviathans, but something in the station director's voice made her pause the recording. Director Thex, usually composed and diplomatic, sounded genuinely afraid. "Additional details," Nova commanded her system. The holographic display flickered, showing footage that made her breath catch. A cryothan, one of the deadliest predators ever documented, lay unconscious in a containment field. Its iridescent scales shimmered even through the grainy footage, massive chest barely rising with each labored breath. "Impossible," she whispered. In 15 years of xenoveterinary medicine, she'd never seen a living cryothan this close. Most people who encountered them didn't survive to tell the tale. The Nightingale dropped out of FTL near Helios 6 hours later. Nova stepped onto the station's medical deck, her specialized equipment floating behind her on anti-grav pallets. The receiving team practically pressed themselves against the walls as she passed. Dr. Ren Voss, the station's head of xenobiology, met her at the containment unit. His long, silver-furred ears were pressed flat against his skull, a clear sign of stress in his species. "Dr. Kingston, thank you for coming, though I fear you've wasted your time. The creature is beyond saving." Nova unpacked her diagnostic equipment with practiced efficiency. "I'll be the judge of that. Brief me." The cryothan was found in the research zone, gravely injured after a territorial dispute with another apex predator. Our security team managed to sedate it, but... He gestured to the massive wound along the creature's flank, where emergency stasis fields barely contained the bleeding. "And you sedated it how?" Nova asked, calibrating her scanners. "Modified neural disruptors, 3 times the normal dose." Nova's hand stilled. 3 times and it's still breathing. "Barely," Ren's ears twitched. "We've lost 2 medical teams just trying to stabilize it. The sedation won't last much longer when it wakes." "Then we better work fast." Nova pulled up the cryothan's biosignatures on her portable array. The readings were unlike anything she'd seen: complex neural patterns, advanced healing mechanisms, and a circulatory system that defied conventional xenobiology. "Fascinating," she breathed, earning a startled look from Ren. "That's not the word most people use when facing a cryothan." Nova smiled grimly. "Most people don't see what I see. This isn't just a predator, Dr. Voss. This is an evolutionary masterpiece, and it's fighting to live." The next hours were a blur of intense concentration. Nova worked methodically, using a combination of regenerative field therapy and targeted molecular reconstruction to repair the worst of the damage. The cryothan's biology fought her at every turn, its natural defenses initially rejecting the treatment protocols. But Nova had learned long ago that the key to treating dangerous species wasn't about dominating them. It was about working with their natural processes, understanding their body's own healing mechanisms. "There," she murmured, adjusting the final tissue regenerator. "Now we wait." Ren stared at the monitors in disbelief. "The readings, they're stabilizing. How did you?" "By remembering that every creature, no matter how dangerous, is first and foremost a patient." Nova checked the sedation levels. "Though I suggest we clear non-essential personnel before it wakes up, this next part requires delicate handling." As if in response, the cryothan's massive form shifted slightly, its crystalline eyes beginning to flutter beneath their armored lids. The room's atmosphere instantly charged with tension. Nova took a deep breath, positioning herself where the creature would see her first when it woke. She'd treated enough predators to know that these first moments would determine everything that followed. "Dr. Kingston," Ren whispered urgently, "please step back when it wakes." "When it wakes," Nova interrupted calmly, "it will decide whether we're threats or not. I intend to show it we're not." The cryothan's eyes opened, pools of liquid silver focusing immediately on Nova. The entire room held its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion of violence. Instead, the creature lay still, studying her with an intensity that spoke of far more than basic predatory instinct. Nova met its gaze steadily, showing neither fear nor aggression. For a long moment, human and Cryothan regarded each other in perfect silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, the creature's defensive posture relaxed. Nova allowed herself a small smile. The impossible patient had just taken its first step toward recovery, and in doing so was about to teach the galaxy a lesson about judging any species too quickly. The next 48 hours on Helios 7 research station tested every skill Nova had acquired in her career. The Cryothan's recovery defied conventional medical wisdom, its body adapting and healing at rates that shouldn't have been possible. But it wasn't just the creature's extraordinary physiology that fascinated her. It was its behavior. "Look at this," Nova said to Dr. Ren Voss, pulling up a neural scan on the main display. The silvery patterns pulsed and shifted in complex arrangements. "These activity patterns, they're not random. There's deliberate processing happening here." Ren's ears twitched skeptically. "You're suggesting cognitive function beyond basic predatory instinct." "I'm suggesting we've severely underestimated these creatures." Nova adjusted the scanner's resolution. "Watch this." She approached the containment field where the Cryothan lay. Its silver eyes tracked her movement with that same unnerving intelligence she'd noticed before. Nova held up a medical instrument she'd been using regularly during treatment. The Cryothan's neural patterns shifted instantly, showing recognition. When she set it down and picked up a new tool, the patterns changed again, anticipating, analyzing. "It's learning," Ren breathed, his scientific curiosity finally overcoming his fear. "Categorizing our equipment based on its experiences during treatment." Nova nodded. "Not just learning, communicating. Watch its eye movements, the subtle shifts in posture. It's developed a basic non-verbal language with me." The station's security chief, Commander Jace Barrett, had been observing silently from the doorway. He stepped forward now, his cybernetic eye whirring as it analyzed the creature. "That makes it more dangerous, not less. A thinking predator is an unpredictable one." "Or," Nova countered, "it makes diplomatic cooperation possible." She turned back to the Cryothan, which had been following their conversation with obvious interest. "These creatures aren't just apex predators, they're apex survivors. They've evolved not just to hunt, but to understand their environment completely." As if to prove her point, the Cryothan slowly shifted its position, careful not to disturb any of the medical equipment attached to its healing flank. The movement was deliberate, almost graceful despite its massive size. "Remarkable," Ren murmured, his scientific nature finally getting the better of his caution. "The precision of its movements, the awareness of its surroundings." Nova smiled. "Now you're starting to see what I see." Commander Barrett remained unconvinced. "Understanding doesn't make it safe. That thing has killed 12 people in the past month alone." "In its territory, defending its resources," Nova pointed out. "We're the ones who built a research station in its hunting grounds. From its perspective, we're the invaders." The Cryothan's silver eyes fixed on Nova, and she could have sworn she saw something like approval in its gaze. She approached the containment field again, this time carrying a holopad displaying the creature's latest medical readings. To everyone's surprise, the Cryothan actually lifted its head to look at the display. Its pupils dilated slightly as it processed the scrolling information. "That's impossible," Barrett whispered. "It can't possibly understand." "Why not?" Nova challenged. "Because we decided apex predators can't be intelligent. Look at Earth's historical records. We once thought the same about dolphins, about corvids, about countless species that proved us wrong." The Cryothan made a low, rumbling sound, not a growl, but something more like a purr. Its neural patterns showed increased activity in areas associated with problem-solving and social interaction. "I need to adjust its treatment protocol," Nova announced, reaching for the field controls. "The tissue regeneration needs to be recalibrated." Barrett stepped forward. You're not seriously considering lowering those shields. The fields interfere with proper cellular regeneration. Nova's fingers flew over the controls. And they're unnecessary. Our patient here understands that hurting me would only hurt itself. The containment field shimmed and partially deactivated. The Cryothan remained perfectly still as Nova approached, its massive form radiating not threat but curiosity. She worked quickly but calmly, adjusting the regenerative matrix nodes along its flank. The creature's skin rippled slightly under her touch, not in pain or aggression, but in what seemed like fascination. Its neural patterns showed intense but organized activity. "It's studying you," Ren observed, his scientific excitement now fully overwhelming his fear. "Learning your techniques, understanding the treatment process." Nova nodded, continuing her work. "Which means it can actively participate in its own healing. That's why the recovery rate has been so extraordinary. It's not just accepting our help, it's enhancing it." The Cryothan's eyes closed briefly in what seemed like contentment as Nova finished the adjustments. When they opened again, they fixed on her with an expression that could only be described as respectful. Commander Barrett shook his head slowly. "In all my years of xenofauna security, I've never seen anything like this." "That's because you've been looking through the lens of threat assessment," Nova said, stepping back to review her work. "Sometimes you have to set aside everything you think you know and simply observe with an open mind." The Cryothan's neural patterns shifted again, forming complex patterns that suggested not just consciousness but metacognition, thinking about thinking. It was rewriting everything they thought they knew about predator intelligence. As Nova began analyzing the new data, she couldn't help but smile. They weren't just treating a wounded creature anymore. They were on the verge of a breakthrough that could transform human-xenofauna relations forever. The impossible patient was becoming an invaluable teacher. The crisis hit without warning. Nova was reviewing the Cryothan's latest neural scans when the station's emergency lights flashed red. The artificial gravity fluctuated, sending loose equipment floating momentarily before crashing back down. "Station core malfunction," the AI announced. "Emergency protocols engaged. All personnel proceed to designated safety zones." The Cryothan's massive head snapped up, its silver eyes scanning the chaos. Its muscles tensed, but remarkably it remained calm, until the containment field protecting its medical bay began to flicker. "No, no, no," Nova muttered, rushing to the auxiliary control panel. The power fluctuations were wreaking havoc with the environmental systems. If they lost atmosphere control in this section. Commander Barrett's voice crackled over the comm. "Dr. Kingston, evacuate immediately. We're losing containment in your sector." The Cryothan rose to its full height, its healing flank showing barely a trace of its former wound. But instead of the expected aggressive response to the chaos, it stood watching Nova intently as she worked to stabilize the systems. "I can't leave," she replied to Barrett. "If these fields fail completely, we'll lose all the research data. More importantly, the atmospheric shift could harm the patient." "The patient?" Barrett's voice rose in disbelief. "That thing will survive. You won't if the oxygen levels drop." Nova's fingers flew over the controls, but it was a losing battle. The backup systems were failing faster than she could reroute power. The Cryothan stepped closer, its massive form looming over her. Every survival instinct screamed at her to run, but she held her ground. "I know you understand what's happening," she said to the creature, not looking up from her work. "I know you can sense the danger, but I'm not leaving you." The Cryothan's neural patterns, still visible on the one functioning monitor, showed intense activity. It understood all right, perhaps better than she did. Suddenly, the floor beneath them shuddered violently. The last containment field collapsed with a crackle of dying energy. Nova stumbled, falling against the control panel as the station's artificial gravity wavered again. In that moment, everything she and her colleagues had theorized about Cryothan intelligence was put to the test. The creature was now completely free, the station was in chaos, and its primary caretaker was vulnerable before it. The Cryothan moved with explosive speed, but not in attack. Instead, Its massive body curved around Nova, shielding her as a section of ceiling panel crashed down where she had been standing. Its scaled hide deflected the debris effortlessly. "Dr. Kingston," Wren's voice joined the chorus of emergency communications. "The atmospheric seals in your section are critical. You have less than 2 minutes." Nova looked up at the Cryothan, meeting those intelligent silver eyes. "We need to move. Now, do you trust me?" The creature's response came not in words but in action. It lowered its head, presenting its broad shoulder to her in an unmistakable gesture. Nova didn't hesitate. She grabbed her essential medical kit and climbed onto the Cryothan's back, gripping the ridged scales along its neck. The moment she was secure, it moved. The Cryothan's navigation of the station's corridors was a masterclass in controlled power. It didn't crash through walls or rampage blindly. Instead, it followed the emergency lighting with precise movements, using its enhanced senses to avoid structural weaknesses and danger zones. They encountered a group of evacuating scientists who froze in terror at the sight of them. The Cryothan simply altered its course, giving them a wide berth while maintaining its steady pace toward the secure zones. "Security teams, hold your fire," Nova called out as they approached the final checkpoint. "The Cryothan is helping." Commander Barrett stood at the security barrier, his cybernetic eye tracking their approach. For a tense moment, his hand hovered over his weapon. But the sight of Nova riding the supposedly deadly predator, both of them working in perfect coordination to navigate the crisis, made him slowly lower his arm. The Cryothan brought them to a perfect stop inside the safe zone just as the emergency bulkhead slammed shut behind them, sealing off the compromised sections of the station. In the sudden quiet, Nova slid from its back, giving its scaled shoulder a grateful pat. "Still think it's just a mindless killer?" she asked Barrett, unable to keep a note of triumph from her voice. The security chief shook his head slowly. I think we need to radically revise our understanding of these creatures." The Cryothan settled onto its haunches, maintaining a protective position near Nova while studying the gathered station crew with obvious intelligence. Its neural patterns, now displayed on the safe zone's medical monitors, showed complex problem-solving and social interaction algorithms that exceeded anything they had documented before. "It didn't just save my life," Nova explained, pulling up the neural data. "It calculated the safest evacuation route, avoided causing panic among the crew, and deliberately demonstrated its peaceful intentions. This isn't just intelligence, it's wisdom." Wren's ears twitched in excitement as he examined the readings. The implications for xenobiology are staggering. A species we classified as pure predator actually possesses advanced cognitive abilities, emotional intelligence, and moral decision-making capabilities. The Cryothan rumbled softly, its silver eyes moving between the speakers as if following the conversation. When Nova approached it with a medical scanner to check for any strain from their escape, it cooperated fully, even adjusting its position to give her better access to its healing flank. "We've been wrong about them all along," Nova said softly. "They're not monsters to be feared or specimens to be studied. They're intelligent beings worthy of respect and understanding, and maybe, just maybe, they've been waiting for us to figure that out." The news of what happened on Helios 7 spread through the scientific community like wildfire. Within days of the station crisis, Nova found herself facing a different kind of challenge: the sudden intense interest of the Galactic Research Council. "They want a what?" Nova stared at the holographic message floating above her desk, the Cryothan lounging nearby with obvious interest in her reaction. "The Council is dispatching a team to evaluate the Cryothan for potential research opportunities," Wren explained, his ears twitching nervously. "They're particularly interested in its neural patterns and problem-solving capabilities." The Cryothan's silver eyes narrowed slightly, its neural readings showing clear recognition of the tension in their voices. Over the past week, it had demonstrated an almost uncanny ability to pick up on emotional subtleties. "They're missing the point entirely," Nova said, packing the medical bay. "This isn't about turning the Cryothan into a research subject. It's about recognizing that we need to completely reshape our approach to xenofauna relations. Commander Barrett, who had become an unlikely ally since the crisis, stood by the door. The Council's not known for its progressive views on non-human intelligence. They still classify cryothans as Category 1 threats, remember. The cryothan made a sound that could only be described as derisive. Its neural patterns showed complex analytical activity. It was not just following their conversation, but understanding the implications. Well, they're about to get a first-hand demonstration of just how wrong that classification is, Nova declared. She turned to the cryothan. If you're willing to help me show them. The creature's response was immediate. It rose gracefully, moving to the center of the medical bay where the neural scanning equipment was set up. Without prompting, it positioned itself perfectly for optimal readings. Look at that, Ren breathed, checking the displays. It's not just cooperating, it's anticipating the protocols. The cognitive processing required for that level of understanding. Nova smiled. Exactly, and that's just the beginning. Over the next few hours, she and the cryothan demonstrated a series of increasingly complex interactions. The creature solved spatial puzzles, responded to abstract concepts, and even began experimenting with a basic form of symbolic communication using the medical bay's holographic interfaces. It's not just learning our ways, Nova explained as she documented the results. It's teaching us about its own intelligence, showing us how to bridge the gap between our species. The cryothan punctuated her statement by pulling up its own medical charts on the holoscreen, indicating with remarkable precision where its healing had progressed beyond the projected recovery timeline. I've never seen anything like this, Barrett admitted, his cybernetic eye whirring as it recorded everything. It's like watching two different species having a scientific collaboration. That's exactly what it is, Nova replied. We're not doctor and patient anymore. We're colleagues exploring new territory together. The arrival of the Council's research team the next day proved to be a turning point. Led by Dr. Marcus Chen, a prominent xenobiologist known for his conservative views on non-human intelligence, they entered the medical bay with an air of skeptical authority. That skepticism lasted exactly 3 minutes. The cryothan put on what Nova could only describe as a performance. It moved through a series of demonstrations that showcased not just its intelligence, but its understanding of scientific methodology. It participated in cognitive tests, showed emotional responses to ethical scenarios, and even corrected one of the researcher's mathematical errors in a probability calculation. This is, Dr. Chen stumbled over his words, staring at the results. This defies everything we thought we knew about predator species evolution. No, Nova corrected gently. It defies everything we assumed we knew. The evidence was always there, we just weren't looking for it because we'd already decided what we would find. The cryothan rumbled in agreement, its neural patterns showing what they now recognized as its equivalent of satisfaction. It had understood the importance of this meeting and had chosen to help prove Nova's point. The implications are staggering, one of the other researchers said, reviewing the data. If cryothans possess this level of intelligence and social capability, what about other species we've dismissed as mere predators? Nova shared a knowing look with her patient. That's exactly the question we should be asking, and I think our friend here has just opened the door to finding those answers. The cryothan's silver eyes gleamed with what could only be described as pride. It had done more than recover from its injuries. It had helped launch a scientific revolution that would change how humanity viewed its place in the galactic ecosystem. As the research team huddled over their findings, Nova approached her unlikely partner. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't just prove them wrong about your species. You proved them wrong about what's possible when we set aside our fears and truly try to understand each other." The cryothan lowered its massive head to her eye level, its neural patterns showing the complex harmonics they had come to recognize as contentment and connection. In that moment, Nova knew they had achieved something far more significant than a medical breakthrough. They had established a bridge between worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart. The day of the Cryothan's release arrived with an air of bittersweet anticipation. The creature's recovery had been complete for weeks, but the extensive documentation of its intelligence had delayed their return to its territory. Now, as Nova stood in the station's launch bay preparing the transport vessel, she felt the weight of what they had achieved and what was still to come. "The Council wants to establish a permanent research post," Wren said, checking the transport systems. "They're already talking about a cooperative study program with the Cryothan population." The Cryothan, standing proudly beside them, showed neural patterns indicating what they now recognized as amusement. It had endured countless tests and demonstrations over the past weeks, proving again and again that its species was far more than simple predators. Commander Barrett approached, his cybernetic eye recording one final set of readings. "Security protocols for the new research initiative have been completely rewritten. No more defensive positions, no more threat categories. We're approaching this as a diplomatic mission now." "Because of you," Nova said to the Cryothan, whose silver eyes met hers with unmistakable intelligence. "You didn't just heal, you showed us how to heal our own misconceptions." The creature's neural patterns displayed complex emotional harmonics that the team had learned to interpret as both pride and affection. It had grown particularly close to Nova, their partnership evolving far beyond the traditional bounds of doctor and patient. "The transport is ready," Wren announced, his ears perking up with excitement. "We've mapped the perfect release point right at the edge of the primary Cryothan territory." Nova gathered her final set of medical readings, knowing they would be invaluable for future xenoveterinary work. "Ready for one last adventure, partner." The Cryothan rumbled affirmatively, already moving toward the transport's cargo bay. Its movements were fluid and powerful, showing no trace of its former injuries. But more importantly, it moved with purpose and understanding, fully aware of what was happening. The journey to the release point was quiet, filled with the kind of comfortable silence that only comes from deep mutual respect. Nova used the time to record her final observations, documenting not just the medical aspects of the case, but the profound implications of what they had discovered. "We thought we were treating a dangerous predator," she dictated into her log, "but instead we discovered a sentient being capable of complex thought, emotional understanding, and genuine cooperation. The Cryothan didn't just survive, it chose to help us understand its true nature." The transport touched down in a clearing at the edge of the dense jungle. Local scans showed other Cryothans in the distance, but they kept their distance, as if understanding the importance of what was happening. As the cargo bay doors opened, letting in the humid air of the Cryothan's home world, Nova felt a sudden tightness in her chest. The creature turned to her, its neural patterns showing similar emotional complexity. "You've changed everything," she said softly. "Every xenobiology textbook will need to be rewritten. Every protocol for species interaction will need to be reconsidered. But more than that, you've shown us that understanding is possible, even across the widest gulfs of evolution." The Cryothan stepped toward the open doors but paused, turning back to face the team. Its neural patterns surged with activity, and then it did something unprecedented. It bowed, a deep and deliberate gesture that combined respect with farewell. "Look at these readings," Wren whispered, staring at his scanner. "It's not just mimicking human behavior. It's created its own symbolic gesture, combining elements it observed from multiple species into something new." Nova stepped forward, returning the bow. "Thank you for trusting us, for teaching us, for showing us that the universe is far more wonderful and complex than we imagined." The Cryothan's silver eyes held hers for a long moment, its neural patterns forming what they now recognized as its expression of gratitude and connection. Then, with graceful power, it turned and bounded into its native habitat. But it didn't disappear immediately. Instead, it paused at the edge of the jungle, its massive form silhouetted against the dense vegetation. Other Cryothans emerged from the foliage, their own silver eyes gleaming with intelligence as they greeted their returned companion. "They're communicating," Barrett observed, watching the interaction through his cybernetic eye. Sharing information, everything our patient learned about us, is being passed on to its community, Nova finished. This isn't an ending, it's a beginning. As if to confirm her words, the group of Cryothans turned to face the transport. In perfect synchronization, they performed the same bow their companion had demonstrated, before melting away into the jungle with fluid grace. Nova felt tears in her eyes as she watched them go. When I became a xenoveterinarian, I hoped to help alien species. I never dreamed they would help us so much in return. Ren's ears twitched with emotion. What you achieved here, it's beyond medical treatment. You've opened a door to genuine interspecies cooperation. The end.